I know, but still.
The artificial intelligence revolution is heating up, but so is the climate.
The summer of 2023 was the hottest on record, and the race to combat the catastrophic effects of our warming Earth is on. In some ways, artificial intelligence may offer a glimmer of hope.
AI-powered climate models can provide more accurate and granular predictions, helping lawmakers make better and faster decisions about climate policies.
But technology is also a carbon culprit. The world's data centers account for about 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, surpassing even those of the aviation industry.
Machine learning had a significant carbon footprint even before generative AI took off. As more companies barrel into the AI gold rush, that could get worse.
So, in this episode of AI IRL, we'll discuss whether AI can help slow global warming or whether it might speed it up.
And if the companies who have long been part of the problem can actually help unlock a solution. Sims Witherspoon, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're an applied climate AI scientist, and you're also the head of a team at Google's DeepMind that's actually working on climate change applications using artificial intelligence. Talk
Indeed.
to us about some of the work that you're doing.
Oh my gosh. I think I have the best job in the world, I have to say. I think that what Google DeepMind is trying to do right now, just to give kind of a broad overview of how we're tackling applications of AI for the climate crisis, is that we approach how we can use AI in literally three core ways. The first is that we try to use AI to understand climate change and its effects on Earth's ecosystem. So we really like to use AI to kind of understand the climate science. The second one is that we use AI to try to optimize current systems and infrastructure because we can't just start over from scratch. Today, we have to continue to use the systems that life depends on. And AI is a software-only solution that can help optimize a lot of those. And the third way is accelerating breakthrough science. The technology we need for a more sustainable future. These are things like fusion for carbon-free energy in the future. And I think that one of the reasons why I love that framing, this understand the problem, optimize current systems and infrastructure, and accelerate breakthrough science is because when you think about then applying that into any sector that has challenges that are driving climate change, you can see what problems are necessary, whether that's necessary to tackle and applicable for AI, whether that's across electricity systems, transportation, industry, buildings and cities.
I was going to ask you about specific challenges that AI can help with compared to traditional methods. What would a couple of those specific challenges be that you're seeing really being helped?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with the first one around understanding climate change. We're doing a lot of work understanding weather and forecasting. We have models that do rainfall forecasting a few hours into the future, and we've been working with the Met Office, and those models have been voted and by over 50 Met Office forecasters as more accurate.
The Met Office in the UK.
Yes. Over 50 Met Office forecasters, yes, in the UK, as being more accurate and more reliable than the traditional methods.
So take something like wind power, let's say. Like, how do you approach the owner of a wind farm and say, please, can we have your data so we can model it in an AI system and predict the weather forecast for the next however long?
So what we would end up explaining is first like the utility of AI. If we had access to not only readily available weather forecasts, but also your operational data around, okay, the wind was blowing this much and this much wind power was being produced. Our models learn the relationship between the weather at that time and how much power was being produced. And so we can say, we can watch those weather patterns. It can learn that relationship, and then it can make inferences about what future power availability will be based on what the weather forecasts say that wind will look like, et cetera. So it really is about building increased efficiency and accuracy and providing these tools to these domain experts who will hopefully be interested in using them. But we never build in a silo. This is why we always work with other partners to understand what they need. What are the problems we can help solve? We can't just be doing that in a silo. We need to be plugged into the community, and that's where we start all of our conversations.
What can AI do in regards to climate and animals, whether that's changes to migration patterns or just making the planet better for species other than our own?
Yeah, It's a really great question. So in addition to mitigation, adaptation, and addressing loss and damage, and climate science, which we mentioned earlier, ecology and biodiversity is a huge area that we can use AI for. One of our projects, specifically Serengeti, is what we've called it, and it's an ecological monitoring system where effectively we have worked with a local group to place motion-activated camera traps across the Serengeti that captures, obviously by motion, captures the animals that pass by the cameras and reduce the amount of time between capturing that data and delivering it to the scientists that are analyzing, to your point, migration patterns, indicator species that, should or maybe shouldn't be in an area, and trying to understand how climate change is affecting those populations. So ecological monitoring, I think, is incredibly important and is something that we're working on as well.
So artificial intelligence can play a part in solving the climate crisis, but it also requires a vast amount of energy, and the data centers that are powering this technology are very energy intensive. So how can we expect the net effect to be positive when it comes to climate change?
It is absolutely true that AI is an energy intensive technology. And like any energy intensive technology, until we have a grid that is run completely on clean energy, those technologies will have a carbon footprint. We approach this at Google DeepMind in 3 different ways. The first is that we try to make our research as carbon efficient as possible. So we look into how we can reduce the amount of compute that is required to train our models, especially over time when we learn more about them. We also have developed a carbon equivalent emissions dashboard that we give our researchers access to with levers that they can control that will reduce the impact of their experiments. So we find that, offering that knowledge is incredibly important to driving action.
So is this like literally, it looks like you're about to process such and such. Did you know this will use X number? Like when you book a flight, it will tell you the carbon emissions of the flight and say, do you want to proceed?
It gives them options around, hey, you can move compute in space and time to a greener grid. You could choose to run this experiment in Norway right now because the grid is incredibly green versus in the UK where at the moment it is carbon intensive. And, before having that sort of knowledge, you just kind of go through your daily setup and, you click go, you run your experiment. And you just might not know that that's a lever that you can control. And so we have surfaced that and made it available and obvious to our researchers, which is great because they all care about that and are choosing to adopt those levers for carbon efficiency. So that's kind of how one of the ways we look at our own house and our when it comes to the research. We also work on tools that help others improve their energy efficiency. So tools that can be used by external third parties.
Almost every technology company out there has some kind of net zero commitment to kind of play their own part in combating climate change. And clearly AI is going to come in, provide all these solutions. Do you think that opens up an opportunity to make some of those goals a little bit more ambitious?
I think we can always, be more ambitious. We're constantly improving, learning what this technology can do and raising the benchmarks. One of the things that Google DeepMind is devoted to right now is helping Alphabet and Google itself achieve its 1 gigaton per year reduction by 2030. And we are working on things that will contribute to that commitment, which I think is, an incredibly ambitious one that we're really excited to be a part of. So,
you mentioned reducing the amount of energy it takes to cool some of these data centers by 30%. So with my skeptic's hat on, I would say, well, that basically means Google spending 30% less cooling its facilities. That's a net benefit to Google. So how do you balance that and avoid the risk of greenwashing?
Well, I think that with a lot of business, when you look at this, it is good to tie sustainable operations to the bottom line because businesses are then incentivized to adopt more sustainable practices. So with energy, this is an easy one because yes, if you're saving carbon, it means you're using less energy, which means you pay less for it. It's just kind of a win-win in that situation. To me, it's not greenwashing because you are actually reducing the carbon equivalent emissions of what you're using and you are using your resources more efficiently.
How quickly do you expect some of these applications in climate change to actually make a difference?
We will move more quickly if we are more engaged in the conversation with domain experts, if we are working with groups like CCAI to open up data sets safely and responsibly, if we are talking with deployment partners who are willing to let us test in real world systems. And I think going sector specific, whether it's a forecasting tool that might take, a couple of years to get ready, or Fusion, which the big joke is that it's always, 10, 50 years out. That depends on the actual application. But the way we move faster is continuing to work with all of these groups so we understand the problem, we get access to the data, we're building tools that people will use and will find value out of, and that we have clear benchmarks for success for AI. How much better do we need to be to replace traditional systems and help with efficiency and accuracy?
10, 20, 30
years? It depends on the application, right? Some of them will, be ready in a couple of months. Some of them are a couple of years. Some of them are decades. It just depends on how big of a challenge, you're going after. And I think one of the things that we've really been surprised by is the speed of AI. Sometimes we expect it to take us a decade to solve a challenge, and a couple years in, we're like, oh, this is great. We're making so much more progress. So it's really, really hard to predict. And I think my researchers would be very upset with me if I tried to put a timeline on it.
Sims Witherspoon, thank you so much for being here. It's been absolutely fascinating.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been fantastic.
Priya Danti, thank you so much for joining us. So you're a professor at MIT, and you're also the co-founder of Climate Change AI. Can you tell us a little bit about what that organization does?
Yeah, so Climate Change AI aims to kind of empower a global community of innovators, decision makers, and practitioners to impactfully use AI to address climate change related issues. So we provide educational opportunities, networking opportunities, grants programs, as well as trying to set agendas and landscape analyses for the broader space about how AI can be used for climate action and how different players can play a role in actually making that happen.
So it's kind of like a brain trust for collecting people who think about climate and AI to kind of come up with some solutions.
Yeah, so AI can be used in a bunch of different ways for climate action, from forecasting solar and wind power to help us balance power grids with more renewables, to helping us optimize heating and cooling systems in buildings to make them more efficient, to helping us accelerate the discovery of next generation clean technologies like batteries.
And where's the cutting edge right now? Is it academia? Is it some of the big tech companies? Is it the non-profits, the NGOs? Like, who's doing the most impactful stuff here?
So there's a little coming from everywhere, but when people think of AI, they do tend to think of, academia or tech companies. But a lot of this innovation is actually coming from, entities that you wouldn't think of as tech companies, like companies in the power sector, companies in manufacturing, NGOs that think about forestry, or NGOs that think about flooding, who are using AI techniques for their own problems and on their own data to actually address these climate change related problems. So basically, lots of entities that just are the owners of climate change related problems have really been doing a lot of cutting edge AI here.
Can you give us an example just on that? What, like a really good, solid, like this is the example of you said the forestry work, something like that, like where that impact is being felt?
Absolutely. So for example, the MAP project, MAAP, it's a coalition of nonprofits that are using satellite imagery to analyze and identify deforestation in real time in the Amazon. And by kind of doing this analysis, they can then take actions to understand what does it actually take to stop deforestation, because we now actually have a clear picture of where it's happening in real time. You also actually have intergovernmental organizations doing this kind of work. So the UN Satellite Center, for example, they also use satellite imagery to do real-time tracking of flooding in Asia in order to understand on a kind of, hour by hour basis, what is happening with flooding, and as a result, what do they need to do to actually support regions that are being flooded at a particular time.
So there's like predictive analysis in this. This is where the AI comes in. Presumably you can monitor more things at once and then also track the changes and predict where action's needed. So it's more than just getting a report. It's a bit more involved, and that's where the AI comes in.
So in those two applications of deforestation tracking and flood tracking, it is actually just the monitoring part. The idea is that you have satellite imagery, and it would be really hard for a human to analyze all of the images on a very fast scale all the time. So basically AI is allowing you to scale up what a human could do, and just kind of analyze more images in order to do that. But there are definitely applications where AI itself is actually, being predictive. So for example, Open Climate Fix, a nonprofit in the UK, they're working with this UK system operator, National Grid, to actually come up with better real-time forecasts of solar power by basically analyzing how productive were the solar panels in the UK in the past based on the weather and time of day, and then actually trying to kind of play that forward.
This flicks at a question that Nate and I talk about a lot across topics when we're looking at AI is how much of this has already been in the works? Because we had the generative AI boom really take off last fall with the onset of ChatGPT. Everyone's excited, but do you have a pulse on what types of applications are new versus those that were pre-ChatGPT era? What can you kind of tell us about the new stuff that's going on?
Yeah, so I'll say that actually a lot of the applications, all of the ones I talked about are pre-ChatGPT era. AI refers to a really broad set of techniques that are not just generative AI or sort of chatbot related techniques. And so there's really been a lot going on for a long time. There are some, advancements that generative AI can enable, but interestingly, in my opinion, most of the more convincing ones are not actually based in text. So they're not what people think of as, ChatGPT. They're things like, I gave this example of, accelerating the experimentation for batteries to reduce the time it takes to invent a battery. You can do things like assessing past experiments to suggest new ones using generative AI, or kind of assessing past molecule configurations for various kinds of clean technologies to suggest new molecules. That's actually a really good use case of generative AI.
This is like material science
Exactly.
stuff. I wonder, we talk a lot about how wonderful AI is and how it's going to solve all the world's problems and give us new medicines and things. But there is this underlying issue that it takes a lot of energy. And I would love to get your view on whether you think enough good is coming out of AI to offset the fact that it takes a lot of power and energy and often natural resources to keep these machines going and getting bigger.
Yeah, data centers and the Global Information Communication Technology Center are in that ballpark of 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so when you're thinking about, are those emissions, we're first, we have to bring every sector to net zero by 2050. That includes computation itself. But also then when you're spending those emissions, the right question as you're asking is it worth it?
And is it worth it?
Yeah, and I'd say that on a specific application basis. So when we think about specific applications of, helping to integrate renewables into power grids, or helping optimize heating and cooling systems, or, pinpointing deforestation, these kinds of applications I've talked about, I would say in a lot of cases, these are worth it. What I'm more worried about is the fact that most of AI across society is not that, right? We use AI for so many things that are potentially not worth the emissions, like accelerating oil and gas exploration or targeted advertising, or it's used to spread misinformation on social media.
For the targeted advertising question, just to extrapolate that forward, in my head, the climate issue on that side of things is the better the targeted advertising, the more junk we're going to buy, which means more shipping and transportation. I think transport uses makes a quarter of the world's greenhouse emissions or something like that. And that means more plastic in the oceans, and that's bad for the natural world and things. Is that the link there, or is there something?
Absolutely, that's the link. And in general, the idea is that AI is an accelerator of the systems in which it's employed. And as a result, it's being, employed more so in ways that drive, consumer behavior that can be paid for by more powerful players in society than otherwise. And so we as a society really, in the same way we're needing to just realign everything in some sense to deal with climate change, our use of AI has to be captured in that. We need to think about how do we align the use of AI, like business as usual AI, with our climate change related goals.
What are some of the limits to AI as far as climate goes?
Yeah, so AI, it's not a silver bullet. So a lot of people think, oh, AI, powerful technology, so any hard problem I don't know how to solve is solved by AI. That's not true. For example, AI is not going to make certain hard value judgments for us as a society. I've definitely been asked by, organizations and by policymakers, can I, put all the data from my country into AI and run some kind of, simulation to then figure out what the optimal policy decision is? And in reality, right, there's no such thing. Our data encodes various kinds of value judgments. We're explicitly making value judgments all the time. Throwing your data into AI and hoping that that's not a value-laden answer. And also AI, when it is a piece of the solution, it's often not the whole solution. So again, we've talked about forecasting solar and wind power or assessing satellite imagery to track floods. And if all you do is give the assessment to somebody and they don't do anything with it, you haven't solved the climate problem.
Every now and again, somebody says, climate change is a lie, the world is flat, aliens exist and are secretly controlling all world governments, something in that camp. Do you think there's anything that is coming out of what you're seeing with AI as it relates to climate that might shift the needle slightly more in favor of science and evidence?
Honestly, I think AI itself is having a very mixed effect on perception of evidence. I think it can both be used to serve targeted information to people based on, where their current state of knowledge is and what they need to know. It's also being used to spread and generate misinformation on the internet.
The classic double-edged sword.
The classic double-edged sword. And I guess what I'd say is in my own work, I think the kind of theory of change I ascribe to is that a lot of societal shifts come from not necessarily the majority, right? But like a very activated minority of people who kind of do a lot to like address issues that they care about. And so in some sense, my work is really about how do you get those people who are passionate about addressing climate change, who have AI skills, or who would like to kind of adopt AI into their own industries for this purpose? How do we activate them and help them work better together and really get those people and organizations to punch above their weight in affecting this kind of societal change?
I'm a big believer in supporting the small changes.
Yeah, I think like a combination of small and big changes are really important, right? You can't just do the small scale changes. You have to do the systemic changes in order for this to work. And so people will often ask me, right, like I work in AI, right? Like what climate problem should I work on? And what I say is, the kind of best problems to work on are ones where you have a sense of the order of magnitude of impact. Like there is a big difference between, like optimizing something for, paper versus plastic straws versus like, really like decarbonizing a building.
Rising sea levels.
Yeah. Like, are you an optimist? Are you pessimist? What's the outlook?
Yeah. So again, I really am an optimist, but I think the thing that keeps me up at night is, so while I've mentioned again that there are more and more resources and talent going into the climate space, making sure that we're actually enabling people to do their best work, that we're using money in ways that are actually effective is what keeps me up at night.
Vridanti, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.